wirelessly updating the health of millions of people. One might assume the following. If the main determinants of health, now very simplified, are sleep, exercise as well as diet, that each of these three systems has kind of one system that kind of manages it or is able to marginally improve this determinant of health. So for sleep, for example, one could already say that aid sleep, a cooling mattress, and now increasingly not only a cooling mattress but also a bed that adjusts basically if it detects snoring. So this is maybe the first iteration of something one could call a smart bed. Now in the future one might also have, additionally to this smart bed, also a small environment. So if this is safe enough, if this then makes sense, one might not cool the entire room, for example, but only cool the environment. One additionally then might say that if one finds studies, for example, that for specific phases and stages of sleep, there are different air makeups are ideal, that one also changes then these air makeups. So one would imagine a kind of either a sleeping room, which then also kind of totally goes dark automatically, and then maybe also introduces already the onset of sleep with kind of going into the room and then already showing you red light and maybe also already playing music. So one could imagine a sleep cube or something like this in the future that then adjusts the air, that then adjusts the temperature of the air, but also the humidity of the air, but also basically has this feedback loop where it is also a sleep tracker, similar to also aid sleep, but also maybe takes into account other factors such as, okay, what is my genome saying about maybe I have a specific sleep disorder that stems basically from my genome and cannot be changed otherwise. And so it would take all of this data into account and then basically optimize my sleep and therefore result in basically a better regenerated me at the next day. So now this is kind of the first idea. And one could imagine now also these two other systems. Now of course there would be multiple different determinants apart from these three. But if one just assumes now these main three, one could already find kind of early evidence pointing towards a future where something like this could be possible. So if the sleep also has access maybe to my health trackers, and maybe in the future it's insulin, for example. If insulin goes up suddenly, if it goes down suddenly, if my respiratory rate goes up, it goes down, then the sleep pod also might react to this. So now this would be the sleep pod. Now one in addition could imagine that wirelessly, if there is, for example, just a small error, a marginal error that for these people with this genetic disease or this genetic, competitive disadvantage, one might also say, for these people the temperature adjustment is actually not properly done. So because maybe of a calculation error, then one might imagine a future in which this is detected and then over air basically pushed out. Now this would only be a marginal change for maybe a couple of hundreds of users, maybe already thousands of users. But what if there are either marginal updates but also major updates which incorporate the latest scientific findings on all of these different things, such as, okay, the air humidity in REM stage 2 is actually 0.1% higher idea for this stage, and then we reduce it afterwards, or maybe the slope of basically the decrease from this stage to this stage in terms of temperature should actually be more like this, in terms of like this, and this then optimizes something. And so one could imagine a future in which at a certain frequency, basically these updates are pushed out, and therefore the health, at least the health that is determined by sleep, and that is then sleep is then optimized, and then the result is better health for all of these people, which basically benefit from this. So this would kind of be the first example, sleep. Now the next example would be diet. One could now assume already, with all of the scientific findings on diet, one just finds the overlap of all of these scientific findings, or just finds the diet that works for the population average. Now this would be basically the population average diet. Now this would be basically the non-individualized diet, but already things like these exist, and so diets like these kind of exist, not necessarily as a program, not necessarily as an on and off program, but as something that is a meal shake in this case. So one could maybe still prefer in the future also the normal eating behavior, but one already has kind of, okay, we took all of the RDAs and put them into a package that is now a powder because it's in terms of transport the best, and so it's also the most practical, and so also the most cost efficient. And so one could take a look at at companies that make already something like this, that put basically all of the different ingredients that, at least as of the current state of art, one knows, and put them into a powder, and then one just consumes this powder. Now, if one just has one powder for basically the population average, then of course there might be individuals that benefit from this because they are exactly the average. Then there are people who have a slight advantage actually, and there might also be many people that have a disadvantage with this population averaged composition of the diet. Now, then the next step would be the individualization, similar to how basically just a normal sleep environment you find in a hostel, for example, might not be ideal, and in a hostel you might also have the disturbance of neighbors. But then, if one has a powder like this, and then one assumes also that the people, similar to how the people already sleep basically in their sleep pod, the people now already are consuming this. Now, if the people are consuming this, and then one pushes basically over air an update to this algorithm, then in this case it's not necessarily over air, only to a certain extent. Because the over air update, if one assumes future factories. So there is also another idea, which basically, so there is this concept out there on YouTube channel Freethink. This is a short documentary that was posted, that instead of basically, so you could send small packages on basically a tube system. Now, if one does this, then one could assume that the future supermarket also is slightly different, because one does not go to the grocery store to get two additional cucumbers, or maybe everything basically that can be bought in the grocery store that fits into a box that is approximately maybe the size of like an Apple box, would be not auto-delivered, but one could deliver this. And then one could assume there is a distribution center which has a certain selection of items, and then there is the next distribution center which has a bigger selection of items. Of course, also economics would play a role, but one could assume that similarly to how for grocery there is already something like this happening, which is these dark stores, these dark grocery stores, which are for food delivery, which is currently basically so the last mile, or often also called, or not often called, but what I heard, I heard also the name hyperlogistics for this, I think also in this documentary, that basically from the warehouse to the customer, or also from the truck to the customer, that this is kind of the step that costs the most, because, well, there have to be so many things that go right. The most important thing is the time and space overlap of basically both of these humans in this case. Maybe also in the future a Tesla bot will, or another robot will basically take over this delivery, as long as they are still that complicated. But if one now would assume something like a tube system, in which in a small box in the kitchen there will basically arrive all the things you could ever wish for, and also the things you would currently order on online retailers, for example, at least if they fit in there, otherwise they would still be delivered, or one could imagine another system. Then if I now assume I have either subscribed already to a meal shake or something like this, or I now have subscribed basically to a nutritional service that now might deliver these meals in a certain interval. This could be weekly, for example, that there comes this box, and if I have a family of 16 children, then there might be multiple boxes that just come, and I can also determine the frequency or the interval in which they come, because then I still need to store them away. But one could also imagine that, similarly to how in certain industries there is already this idea of just-in-time delivery that reduces basically the need for storage on all sides, or at least if it works properly. So the idea is that instead of me being entity one and there's another entity there, so this could be a factory, this could also be a subset, basically a working station in the factory, this could also be a human, for example. Let's just assume I'm making a chair, and the one person is making the legs of the chair, the next person is making the top of the chair, the next person is making the thing that is where you lean on the chair. And so maybe there is a process where the next person has to test out basically how it fits on there. Maybe a chair is not necessarily the best idea, but one could imagine a thing that where basically where the completion of each step is required until the next step is done. And so if one would have such a system set up, then one could also, so this would be for basically, as of currently, just-in-time delivery in terms of business. Then one would try basically to optimize all of the workflows in a way such that I don't have to store hundreds of chair legs, and the next person doesn't have to store hundreds of, chair bottoms, but instead I would basically deliver them just in time, just as the next person needs them. Of course, there is a big optimization, one could call this also computation, needed in order to optimize this. Now, in terms of the meal delivery, now one could think of a future in which an entity, this could be now a factory, or not necessarily a factory. Let's just assume again the milkshake. So the milkshake is kind of easy because it probably could be automated. So we assume that there is this warehouse in which there are hundreds of food powders. And so the hundreds of food powders, also nutritional powders, could also be supplements. For example, if a certain person needs a certain supplement, then or has the requirement, or does say, okay, I want to take this many grams of creatine because I think it improves my sport performance. Or one could also then imagine again an algorithm layered on top of this, where okay, do I want to activate all that scientific research that are and then individualized to me, that basically give me nutritional benefits from having these supplements in my milkshake already in the dose that I need at this exact point in time. So one could imagine a just-in-time delivery for this milkshake. So let's just assume I am working here, and then it says bling, and then the algorithm has calculated that exactly now, based on my glucose that in the future might be measured on my watch, based on my respiratory rate, based on the time I have been awake, based on how many calories I spent in the workout in the morning, based on my blood, I don't know, based on many other things, also my resting heart rate in the last night, based on the data from the sleep part, then at this point in time the milkshake basically arrives within the small box in my kitchen, maybe already done. So there could be anything ranging from basically a food powder to already cooked meal. So the meal, of course, now could also be made, but for the meals one has to assume now there is a certain latency to it. So of course now one could bake this latency into the system such that the cooking already begins 30 minutes before the algorithm. So 30 minutes before the actual thing, one just takes the current data that basically predicts the best meal, and of course this data then could change, but if it takes 30 minutes for the cooking of the meal and then the delivery of the meal, then one would have the meal only 30 minutes later, which then would be not the most accurate data, but it would only be the extrapolation of the data from 30 minutes ago. But if this was now a milkshake, also because now this, so one could imagine basically a bowl of some sort, and there are all these pipes that lead to this bowl, and so one would only need basically a marginal unit of this powder, and then a marginal unit of creatine, and a marginal unit of flaxseed powder comes in there. And so one could basically, similarly to how one would have together a dough, basically have all the ingredients of the milkshake and then stir it up, and then this is basically delivered in a package. For example, let's just say every 2 days. Let's just maybe also not be so. On the one side, we could have this just-in-time delivery, but maybe also, as of currently, one could imagine a delivery every couple of days, with basically, let's just say every week. Every week you get basically a milkshake that is based on all of the data that at this point in time was available to the algorithm. This could have been that 10 years ago you already tracked your macronutrients and then also measured your fasting glucose and so on and so forth. But this could also be that there has been a study 2 weeks ago which found out about this relation, and this is now also embedded into this. So the simplified assumption is kind of for the algorithm. So the algorithm would say, based on all of the data I know, this is the best solution. And so this would arrive, or maybe your meals would arrive every Sunday, or maybe your meals would arrive basically 3 times a day, or maybe your milkshake arrives and then you have 2 days in order to empty it, and then the next portion comes. But one could also now imagine the system where also including basically the variable fasting and extending basically fast, sometimes not extending fast, basically also eating frequency, including it as a variable, and this then would be just-in-time delivery. So now, how would the wireless update happen? By multiple factors now. So the first one is that the algorithm just is updated. So basically there is all the data, and the algorithm then interprets this and then puts out the milkshake in some frequency, in some form, or not necessarily the milkshake, but the ideal nutrition. Now, one could also imagine a system like this, where I stand in front of a vending machine at the train station, and then all of the data the algorithm has, so based on all I know, and based also maybe on the selection of food powders I have, because currently we are disconnected from this hub, and also this hub has delivery issues. So based on all of the powders I have stored basically in a big box underneath my vending machine here, and all of your data, this is the best food I can give you. And then you would have either a cup the cup would already be there, similar to a coffee machine, and then you would just drink something like this. Or it would also basically cook a meal real quick, or get the meal delivered from the next by station. I mean, one could imagine, currently we have restaurants everywhere. One could imagine that in the future something like this exists, but then it would be distributed basically to 15 vending machines that basically are outside of this restaurant and basically delivering in kind of a loop all of these meals to the next machines. Now, or vending machines, basically access points to nutrition, one could also call them. Now, if the milkshake is again only population based, and currently this is already happening. One could set up, for example, with company Huel, for example, there is also another shake, there are a couple of other companies as well that do something like this. Y-Food, for example, also exists. There also is the original food shake company, which is called Soylent, which is more soy-based compared to other companies. And so one could now imagine that every now and then they publish just a new version, or they basically update not their algorithm, but in this case just their recipe for their shakes. And maybe also they have different recipes out of which you then can choose, or maybe you in the future have an algorithm that tells you which one would be best for you. And currently you could also say there's already a prototype. I can just go into Microsoft Copilot or on ChatGPT-4 on OpenAI's website, in this case also the turbo version as of now at least, and then ask, okay, based on all of what you know, basically. So you could, I could, for example, just screenshot basically my weekly training plan, and if I have this in a table somehow, like 40 minutes of resistance training, then on the next day this, and then the next day this, based on this, and also here is a screenshot of all of my blood data I ever recorded. Actually, recently did this. I had a screenshot, so I had Insight Tracker, so I uploaded all of my blood data history to Insight Tracker. And then I could export it as a CSV file, and this CSV file, then basically just an Excel sheet separated by commas, I think. I took a screenshot of this because I could only upload one picture file, and then I sent this to Copilot and asked, okay, what could I improve on based on, okay, I have these symptoms, and so on and so forth, and what could this be? And so one could imagine that, again, based on all of what one knows, that the algorithm then would calculate the most optimal meal for basically the request. One could also say, one gives the algorithm more rights, and then also says, okay, also consider meal timing. One could say, for example, that nutrition is kind of just a page, and you can activate the whole page first of all, and then it is set up. And then you could activate, okay, I want to include meal timing. Then you could also select how many meals per day you want to have. Then you could also select, okay, maybe the first 2 meals of the day can be shakes, but I don't care really. But the last 2 meals need really to be normal food, because I want to eat with family. I want to also experience normal food and also include this many things of this. And so one could, again, back to the Copilot thread, one could already ask Copilot what out of all of the meal shakes that are on the market, what is the best one for me, suitable for me, based on all of what you know, based on basically you searching through the internet, but also based on the data I give you. Now, the wireless updates now could happen on multiple levels. So first of all, one could update the ingredients. Let's just say, okay, there is a new method for harvesting olives, and this method for harvesting olives is just implemented, and then the olives that are actually available in the cooking factory are basically already implemented, because, well, the algorithm, or not the algorithm, but the method is implemented, and so all of these the harvesting machines are updated over time, for example, if one assumes this is automated. Of course, maybe not so much, but one could, or maybe there's, for example, a way of storing olive oil, because the last way was with microplastics, and then these microplastics would seep into the olive oil. I don't know what the proper word is, but something similar to this. And so one could imagine that then this is implemented, and so one could say to a certain extent, due to this finding, that then the system is updated, kind of. Now, what I'm actually thinking of mostly is that then if one, again, population-based milkshake, and this already kind of exists. There is already a factory that makes milkshakes. Now, these milkshakes are based on population-based findings, and so if I subscribe to Huel, for example, on their website, but I can also subscribe to other products, for example, currently I'm subscribed with Amazon Subscribe and Save to a bulk kind of meal shake, but mostly it's a protein powder, which is a protein powder blend. And this now gets auto-delivered to my door actually, whereas the Huel one would get sent differently and would not get auto-delivered to my door. And one could also do this with other meal shakes as well. I'm just naming these companies mostly for the reason that I want to also first of all mention that this already exists, and also basically the first prototypes of systems like these already exist, and the big work is basically connecting all of these different things in a way that makes sense. Because currently the connection often has to be made by oneself, and so this is the complicated part, one could also assume. And so if one takes basically over the plugin connection, so a plugin in this sense I think of as a mostly automated process that can be kind of activated by maybe subscribing to it and by unsubscribing to it. So it should be a decision that's as simple as, okay, activate this, not activate this. I recently set up a savings plan, for example, again, or I restructured my savings plan, and there was already an option for, do you want to have an inflation adjustment? So this inflation adjustment can be set to 2%, but it can also be higher. So with the higher inflation adjustment, one can basically over time increase the amount of money that is basically withdrawn from my account in this case, and basically invested into ETF stocks with cost averaging. And so every month this would kind of automatically increase. And so this is also kind of an implementation of something like this. There have been these findings where Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky discussed, I think, part of those in their book, Thinking Fast and Slow, but also in other books. And Richard Taylor, for example, I think did also some work in this regard. And so there have been findings where if you offer people the option, so the rational long-term option to basically opt into something like this, that there should be an inflation adjustment, then they accept this. But if you then if there is work associated, and the work also is not only associated with it, but also of course has to be done, and of course there are always hundreds of other competing tasks, and every human has to decide basically at any point in time which tasks to do. And so something like, okay, I need to do this, and might be forgotten. I need to inflation adjust the next thing, also because it could be automated. So why not have something like this already set up? So basically the smarter system is the one that allows the rational mind, the more long-term planning mind, to basically for the future calculate these decisions or opt into decisions that are kind of smarter based on latest scientific findings. So now back to the meal shake. If now Huel decides that there are 10 different studies, or that this now has changed and then need to take something out of the product and add something else to the product, then basically if you subscribed to, let's say, one product of Huel, then you just get the next version automatically. So you update, basically you have yourself attached to the progress of technology, at least with this certain chain. So there is the, I think, European Food Agency that gives out food recommendations. Then based on this, the Huel white powder, so the original powder, and also Huel black are calculated, or there is a recipe that is made, maybe also some adjustments. And then the next stage is that you connect basically to this here, to a meal shake in this case, but this could also be in the future a meal service that already makes your meals, and these come then in these small boxes, and you can return the boxes everywhere in different restaurants or different vending machines. One could imagine something like this, but now currently this exists with meal shakes already, so I'm using this as an example. And so now I'm getting these auto-delivered to my door, and the only thing I have to do is open this up, put this into my meal shaker, and then drink the meal shake. And so I'm attached basically to the speed to the latest scientific findings through this connection. Now, of course, this might be very latent. Maybe there is a new version of the black powder, for example, which might come out only every 2 years, and also this is population averaged and maybe not individualized to me, because I might have this and this and this, and I might have pollen allergy, and if I now want to also have my supplements in there, then this needs to be individualized. So now we enter kind of the next stage, or the next step, which is that I already tried a prototype kind of this, which would be that one incorporates the data one has. So this could be the medical history, this could be all of the tracking data one gets, kind of the tracking data one can record without medical requirement for this. But then one could also imagine that one has kind of a certain overlap. For example, CGMs, so continuous glucose monitors, where there in certain countries you can only get them with basically a need because you are diabetic, but one could also now, in certain countries, one can buy these already. So if I now have data from my Garmin watch, if I have also data from my Galaxy watch, which might be slightly different, but also maybe to allow for redundancy, or it could also be a Whoop, or it could also be a Polar tracker. It doesn't really matter. Or it could also be data from my sleep port. And so, if one has then this data, and in this case I experimented mostly, so the additional data step for me was to first of all upload all my blood data, all my historic blood draws, not that many, but a couple of them I had, and so I uploaded them. But I also in last December took my first blood draw, which was kind of designed to then inform future decisions. So InsideTracker then gives out lifestyle, nutrition, and supplementation recommendations, maybe something else which I forgot. No, I think I got all of them. Exercise recommendations also, and then sometimes automatically tracks them. So I can connect them to my Garmin watch, and then it automatically tracks, for example, whether I did resistance training. So it checks whether there is an activity that is resistance training that has been for more than 30 minutes. And if I hit this threshold and I have this activity, so out of all the activities, it filters them basically for the certain things it requires for resistance training, for example, or also for cardiovascular training. And resistance training does not count for cardiovascular, and so on and so forth. And then it automatically check marks this. Now, it then gives out food recommendations. And now I said again, and this in the future maybe might be done by an algorithm, because the only thing that needs to be established would be the connection. But currently I am kind of the connection. I am rationally, with System 2 thinking, creating this connection by thinking about these two things and connecting them. So how did I connect them? I took all of the nutritional recommendations. I then basically took the overlap of which, so out of all the nutritional recommendations, I took those which I could find in a powdered form. I then decided that I would drink a morning drink. As long as basically this morning drink is stable, I then have basically the link established that with a certain frequency my blood draw updates. Then InsideTracker updates, if I'm still subscribed to InsideTracker, updates the food recommendations. I then take all of those which I can find in a supplement form, and they are basically now in my morning drink. And so one has basically established this connection of these three different things. I drink my morning drink every single day, and as long as this is consistent, the connection is kind of consistent. As long as I'm subscribed to this, and as long as I'm also basically sourcing all of the ingredients or buying all of these ingredients and also finding them personally. But now what I could do in the future, and one could imagine a future in which now I tell a company like Huel, but a company that is like Huel or is individualized, that what if I can just log in with my InsideTracker account in Huel? And so on top of this, now Huel, for example, could already offer an individualized on top of Shake. So they would offer basically the baseline product, and then they would have, similarly to how they also now have daily greens, other companies have also greens, for example, but they additionally would basically add your supplements. And these supplements would be based these could be based on your personal preferences to a certain extent. So I would tell them, for example, put in 10 grams of creatine, put in 1 capsule of turmeric, and put in omega-3 fatty acids additionally, because I think these are useful. But one could also, again, imagine an automated system in which there also does not need to be a nutritionist authority, because if I tell them, put in, 250 grams of rapamycin, for example, then this might be something that needs to be checked by a doctor. So one could, again, also establish check marks for this, where if you hit certain doses, or if you then want to also have medication already in your food drink in the morning. So basically have this one morning drink, and this gives you the protein you need in the morning. This acts or serves as your breakfast, but this also includes all of the different medications, and this is also made sure because we double checked with all of these different things and the side effects that this is not counteracting this, and so on and so forth. So what if I could connect Huel to InsideTracker, and now instead of Huel, or maybe also at another company, maybe Bulk, or I don't know, what if I get an individualized check that is based on not only my blood work, but also all of my medical history, maybe also based on my genome, maybe also based on maybe a couple of personal preferences I want to put in there, or basically a couple of toggles I can check and not check, such as, okay, I want to have only 2 out of 5 meals of the day should be milkshakes, and the rest is kind of on my own, the rest I decide for myself. Health determinant 3, exercise. So first of all, there might be multiple different things which one might expect in the future, such as the exercise pill. But currently, exercise is something that needs to be done in a certain fashion, it seems to be, in order to optimize basically mortality, but also maybe health span and also lifespan. So, and also maybe current health, or short to midterm or long-term health. In this case also short to midterm, but mostly maybe thinking about midterm, because in the short term exercise seems to always kind of degrade or take away from otherwise available energy. So the first iteration of this now is that one writes a program. So I will now just go through multiple iterations of this, and I will call them V1, V2, V3. Balaji Srinivasan has also used this, so I want to credit him for using this very smart principle of just going to the next version instead of, okay, there is also this future in which there is a marginal step towards the next iteration of this. So V1 would be that you write an exercise program. Now, and then you try to follow this exercise program. And not problem, but program. Now, in the past, people used to work out not necessarily as in working out, but the concept of working out seems to have only been established in the last couple of 100 years, maybe. But before, of course, there have already been the Olympics, so people used to run and so on and so forth. But then there are these different perspectives of thinking, such as, okay, there have been the Greeks, and they already had kind of the Olympics like thousands of years ago, and then on the other side, basically nobody had. And there you also have the Greek statues, for example, and then on the other side, basically in the last century only, not in this century, but in the century before, people started working properly out with barbells and so on and so forth, and all of these different exercises didn't really exist. So maybe there is something in between, but I don't really know what it would be. So maybe there's a missing link in between those two. Now, currently, one can write an exercise program by oneself, or have it written already by a trainer, which already would be another version, because then the influence is already kind of externalized. So the decision variable of what exercise program do I follow can already be externalized and reduced therefore. So the reduction of decision variables has been a theme in many different areas of my life as of recently, and I started to think more about how can I reduce not decision variables, but decision variable optimization responsibility. And so one could first of all think now, okay, version 1 would be I write my own exercise program. Version 2 would be externalize this with non-automated things, so this would not be a software program. Version 3 now would be, okay, out of all the latest scientific findings, based on maybe a couple of things I input, now give me the best exercise program for me. Also, I input this goal, so I want to focus on this, I want to focus on this, I have this much in terms of budget, so I'm willing, if I travel, also have a short subscription for this gym and for this gym and for this gym, whereas another person might say, okay, I don't have that much budget, and so I might want to seek out working out places that are kind of outdoor working out places, instead of seeking the gym, which might cost an entry fee of, I don't know, $15 for just 2 hours. Still, to a certain extent, ridiculous that one cannot just go into a gym. Maybe also based on the business models of gym, where they kind of run on subscriptions. And well, now the next version of this would be that I have an automated program. This program could be in the web already, this could be on my phone, this could also ideally be on all of the devices which I have. One could also call this cross-platform. So if I go to the gym, now I start the workout program, and this program tells me what to do. Now, to a certain extent, one could then, apart from the program optimization, so apart from, okay, this is me as the organic entity, and then out of this there is a program that tells me what to do, one could now also say that to a certain extent I want to automate basically the completion of the program. Now, basically there are two different levels of automation one could think of. The first one would be that with System 1, as the phrase again coined by Daniel Kahneman and also Amor Tversky, or differentiation or the model of the mind, basically the System 2 thinking as the more rational thinking, the slow thinking, and the System 1 thinking as the more autonomous part of the mind that is basically also maybe mostly the subconscious, but also maybe including the body. So if one, apart from me butchering probably the definition, if one now thinks, and this has been our thinking in the last couple of years, which I try to implement, I try to basically reduce many different things such that the program would be as simple as possible in order for me to have ideally maximum adherence to a program I design for myself. This could be then a weekly program, but this could also be things like, okay, I just wear the same workout clothes, because then basically I reduce these decision variables that could act as a threshold for preventing me basically reaching 100% adherence, so if I, for example, go out and I don't have the workout clothes already ready and it's -5 degrees in winter and I have to go onto a run because that's what's scheduled, then that might prevent me to a certain extent if I don't have already the right clothes, and if I then realize, okay, I just threw everything into the laundry. So by having figured something like this out in advance, one then needs to think about these things less. The same would be true for maybe getting something like a watch instead of tracking a run on the phone, because then the phone needs to be charged, and then what if the phone gets wet because it's outside and the phone isn't waterproof, and so on and so forth. Now, so one currently in the last couple of years I have been thinking about how can I basically train my subconscious part and therefore run the automation. The automation is now not necessarily something that is outside of me and then goes basically through system 2 and then only reaches system 1, which then would kind of do the execution. But instead I basically talk to my system 1 in a way that is kind of just repetition of kind of just a ideally standardized same routine again and again, and then I can also, if I'm in the gym, think about things, or if I'm on a run I can think about things, because the running itself has been automated to such an extent that I don't really have to think about, okay, which route am I taking, because I just default to a certain route and then I realize, okay, 40 minutes later I thought about some things and the run is finished, instead of, okay, but it's so hard and I need to do the next step, and so on and so forth. So one could also think about automation inside of oneself, but that's not necessarily what this video is about. So, back to now the next version of this. There are currently a couple of programs already, or apps, or services that allow you to basically, within defined constraints, such as I have 40 minutes, such as I have these and these issues, I want to target these and these muscle groups, I want to run this split, and so on and so forth, then have basically an automated, a workout automatically created for you that then considers things which for the rational part of your mind, or my mind at least, would take hours basically in order to figure this out. Such as, okay, if I do run on a Sunday, but then I do train legs in addition to whole body on a Monday, what happens then on Tuesday if I do a sprint workout? So what would be out of these three, the ideal order of these three? But then I also have to consider other things, such as previously, for example, I went on a Sunday to sauna in the late part of the day. If then I'm on the late part of the day, so in the evening sometimes, in the sauna, how does this impact my strength training on the next day? And if I have a certain given thing which I need to do, on which of these days would it fit the best without basically having such large downsides on the other things? Or if I train whole body again on a Saturday, does it make sense that I have it on a Friday? And then if I would rotate, for example, or change basically the circuit training, the additional circuit training from Saturday to Sunday, and then I have to run on a Saturday, how would this impact kind of the next training? And so on and so forth. So one now already has some of these programs. In my case, what I'm using is I previously used a workout app called Strong, and now I switched to basically tracking on Garmin. But now one could already kind of say, what if there was an update, wirelessly pushed, as stated in the beginning of the video, that would just give me a bigger exercise selection. Currently, Garmin, the workout tracking in Garmin, so the resistance training workout tracking is still kind of a prototype to a certain extent, one could say. I mean, it's still maybe one of the options one could consider, and one of the main advantages is that during a workout I can basically track my workout. And this I also do for the sprint training, because Garmin offers basically not just resistance training tracking, or you can basically design workouts that include not just resistance training but also other things like, okay, an interval running. And so I designed my interval training on my Garmin, on Garmin, but I also have all the resistance training on Garmin, but only for the ones that I do with barbells, because for the machines there are just no exercises that I can separately track, so I don't have them stored in there. And on Saturdays, which I use for the circuit training, what I do there is that I track just 3 workouts, and I don't really track it, but I kind of track the sets on repetitions by just pressing basically the next button, and then it automatically kind of tracks at least the repetitions. But of course this only kind of works if the watch is in movement, so if I do leg presses, then often the watch does not move properly, and so it is not properly tracked. Nonetheless, this seems to be kind of the best integration as of now, because it allows me to, over the course of the week, and I designed my workout plan for the week, so it ever repeats, continuously repeating for the week. I don't have any other consideration. Of course, over the course of the year, other things might occur, such as it gets colder outside, so there are additional variables which I cannot really control. But if now Garmin decides to allow a bigger exercise selection, because they programmed 25 machine exercises, which they currently don't have, then I could also track the Saturday training. So basically my health would potentially improve because I can now track the Saturday training, and this would allow me to also see progress in there instead of not seeing progress. And this would also allow me maybe to track again more training. And so these small things can already kind of happen. Of course, now this is not a thing that overnight maybe improves the health of millions of people by 10%, but that's usually also maybe not how it happens, but it happens by these small incremental steps. So 0.01% there, and then these 10 people who are using Garmin resistance training tracking basically can make the next steps and then can maybe give feedback and so on and so forth. And these systems can slowly basically improve over time. So now, the next version of this, so we are currently on kind of V3. What is V4? And this is something that I have been kind of introduced by my gym having these machines already. So there are 6 machines in my gym, which are from company eGym. Now, company eGym also makes the app for my gym, and they also make the apps for other gyms as well. So this is one company. I will then explain basically on this company, or on the example of this company, how this could develop in the future. But there are also other companies already, for example Arcs, which I recently took a look at in terms of watching multiple YouTube videos about this, is offering kind of a somewhat similar thing, but they seem to be in a kind of prototype stage compared to eGym, which is already kind of a professional gym solution a gym can buy. Whereas the other one, for example, so now here is the idea. Instead of moving up barbells and moving down barbells, you can kind of just move the weight, and the weight is, or the resistance is provided by a machine. What this allows is that every portion of the movement can kind of be controlled better, because with a machine you often have the problem that you can pull and you can push, and so the more control you give the machine, the more you can basically optimize and also have latest scientific findings. So you can not only optimize, for example, for the push, but also then for the pull in again. So you can also not only train the eccentric portion, but also the concentric portion. So one could think of a pull-up, for example, and now if instead of a pull-up I have a lat pull-down, and I basically strap myself into this lat pull-down, then I can also have more weight. And instead of, okay, I now have to get a weight belt, and then I have to get this weight plates and so on and so forth, this could be also more time efficient. Now, here is the idea, and this now already kind of exists. So, and I will now explain this on eGym, but also explain kind of future iterations of this. What if instead of me making my own workout plan and then listening to another Superman Lab podcast, and then Andy Galpin talks about something else, and then I read a book, and then I also make these observations on myself that maybe I should do this, and maybe my biceps volume has decreased in the last couple of weeks, so I might again introduce more weight or more sets with bicep training, but then also over time I should have the workout fairly consistent, because if I change it up too much, then I am kind of exposed to these short-term stimuli of, okay, Huberman says this, Andy Galpin says this, and then I try to include this similarly to how a diet should be stable over the long term. And if I allow too many changes in the short term, then this might more expose kind of the weaknesses of me kind of trying to react to these new stimuli, whereas in reality they are actually not optimized stimuli. So the optimizations I make are actually kind of just pseudo optimizations, whereas if I would view this through the lens of, okay, how can I optimize the whole year of resistance trainings, then I would see kind of this differently compared to, okay, this person says this, and now I try to incorporate this into my diet, into my exercise regimen, into my sleep tracking, not sleep tracking, but into my sleep performance, sleep setup, or whatever one would call this in terms of sleep. And so the big upside of having kind of the own control of something like this is that one can change it at any time. But the big downside of this is that one is also kind of exposed to all of the biases one self has, but also then I change my workout because this, and because Jeff Nippard released his latest video on this, and then I try to incorporate this, but then it turns out that the version of me that has thought this out like 3 years ago kind of was smarter than the version of me that just tries to react to these multiple stimuli, because there were also 16 other variables which I over the course of the last 3 years have considered, which I then forgot about when I tried to implement this latest thing which I now saw on the internet. That's a big downside. That's a big downside to having basically admin control over a workout program like this. So if one then has externalized this, then a trainer, for example, could already say, okay, you're just trying to kind of avoid exercise really, and trying to avoid these sprints on Tuesday because they are really hard. It seems to be the case, but of course now they need to be hard, because otherwise you're not increasing your VO2 max. So one could also simulate the trainer entity in oneself, but maybe usually one doesn't. So now in terms of the resistance training workout with eGym, there are now currently 6 machines. There is also a circle available with 9 machines, which is available at another gym. But there are already 19 machines of this. The latest version or the latest machine already has been released. So what is the big selling point of these machines? It's that they are connected basically to the internet. And so instead of me, if I go, for example, on a Saturday is kind of machine training. So. And this machine training now already has kind of embedded information or kind of an embedded algorithm, which is that at least what I chose kind of. So there are these machines, which in my gym's case are matrix machines. If I go into the section, there are only machines. And the workout as it currently consists out of is that I just do all of the machines. I do 3 sets on all of the machines, and I usually do as many repetitions as I can. The idea is to get to 10 repetitions. Ideally, but I also try to take the highest weight, and then I do drop sets kind of from the highest weight down to whatever marginal decrease seems to be useful at this point in time. Again, allowing the calculation for, okay, ideally I should hit 10, but what if I can again hit 5 repetitions with the highest weight? Then this is maybe also something that makes sense, because if I then have the next lowest weight, then I might be able to do 12 repetitions, but then I usually cut it at 10 because I try to optimize for 10 repetitions, because otherwise, again, time constraint if I do too many repetitions. And also, of course, there are these ideal ranges for hypertrophy. I think usually cited at or referred to as between 6 and 12 repetitions per set. Now, the program I am currently running on basically is, okay, so there are multiple layers now already implemented. First of all, one had to design these machines. The person who designed these machines probably observed lots of things already. Then there are these machines. Then companies make these machines, and there is this evolution of the companies competing against each other with the different machines. And the next evolution, or the next step, not evolution, is then the selection by the gym chain in this case. So the gym chain says, okay, out of all these different companies, we select this, but we don't select all the machines, but we have a certain selection because we think that this might be a certain workflow people can go through, and then they can go from this machine to this machine, and then, okay, if we position it like this, then they have leg press, but then they do core, which then gives the legs a little bit of a pause, and then they go to the next machine instead of having to go here, 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 here. They kind of can go through this, and then maybe already have kind of a workout which also has automatic pauses kind of baked into this. Now, in terms of resistance training, the eGym machines now might be the next step, which allow also not only kind of the overall layout and also the machine selection, which then also the people can choose. If I can choose the gym, not the selection, and I have a bad day, for example, and I am not that workout adherent, then I might just cut it off at 30 minutes instead of the usual 40 minutes, or at 35 minutes, and maybe not do the additional machine, or just also not as dramatic as this, just okay, the last rep I maybe just don't do. So, and okay, if I estimate the last rep that's in the tank, maybe it's not this rep, but maybe it's 1 rep earlier. And so, if I also don't track my workouts, then over time there might be kind of this slow security breach of protocol, of basically adherence protocol, which occurs, which I have not obviously, but observed in myself again and again and again. Just like these small decisions, okay, let's just take it a little bit back here and here and here a little bit, and eventually you realize, okay, you need to again train harder. So, the resistance training machines now from eGym would allow to externalize the control of also the movement on the machines themselves and also the weight selection. So if I sit on these machines, first of all, they can do a 1 rep max test. Now, in terms of kind of the overall, what is the overall goal of fitness optimization, one now has this idea, also to a certain extent propelled forward maybe by Brian Johnson, that one tries to either reduce the biological age, so absolutely speaking, or reduce the aging speed, relatively speaking, which would be usually the average aging speed, depending on the test one does. Now, if one does this, or rather implements this goal, then workout adherence again would be higher maybe if one also incorporates these machines. So let's assume now, instead of all these matrix machines, they would have the machines replaced by these eGym machines. So what I could do on a Saturday is that, in addition, now these machines So what I could do on a Saturday is go basically like a circle through all of these machines. Currently I do supersets, which means that I sit on one machine and then I do rows, for example, and the next machine would be something that does not impact the rows or is kind of the reverse muscle group. So in terms of basically training the back, I would then train chest, for example. Now, one could imagine that one already thinks about what is the ideal layout of these machines, and one already has done something like this. So the machines are arranged in a certain fashion, and they are basically to be done in a circular fashion. So it's a circuit, and you start at machine 1 and then you go to machine 2, and basically there can be 6 people on the machines and they rotate. They rotate based on basically the timing that is also dictated by the machines. So one then sits on there, the weight is automatically determined, the weight is updated based on a 1-rep max test that is automatically suggested after a couple of training sessions. Then there are also multiple different modes. There is an isokinetic mode, there is a mode that focuses on eccentric, on concentric, and so they also switch over time according to a smart algorithm already. Now, if I sit on these machines, the current problem I have is that they basically, due to the rotational structure, and that this should be a circuit because this would allow the gym to have more throughput, that I cannot do my supersets on there, so I have to wait for sometimes 15 seconds, which I usually don't do, and so I try to avoid waiting at the gym because, well, I could as well do another set of another muscle group, but then if I switch in and out of the circuit, then I haven't really found an implementation that works. And also these are just 6 machines, so if I do a full workout, then I have to split my workout time between these machines and actual machines, but then I cannot do the full matrix circuit on a Saturday for these machines, and then I haven't really found a solution with these 6 machines. But still, they are kind of a prototype, and I'm also using this as an example. Now, if you paid attention to the lighting, I also have an automation for sleep optimization already kind of built in. So I'm using smart lights with Samsung Health, and these smart lights now have an algorithm that is called, or an option or a feature, which is called circadian lighting, which adapts the lighting temperature according to the outside temperature, and therefore optimizes basically my circadian rhythm and optimizes it towards sleep. In addition, I have put in rules that tell basically the lights that they should go down in intensity by hour, and then so basically at every full hour the intensity of the light, if it is turned on, is reduced by a certain percentage, which I calculated multiple times, and I had different iterations of this. Of course, then eventually you also need to hit the target of, okay, when do you go to sleep, and what happens then if you don't go to sleep at this time. So ideally this also would be automated. So one could think of an automation that is like the Galaxy Watch detected that you have been waking up at this point during the day, so based on basically what our extrapolation of this data is, that you probably are likely to go to sleep at this time, and so therefore we already optimized the rest of the day in terms of the lighting for this sleeping time. And the Garmin, for example, does a sleep need calculation, and so they could basically already, okay, based on how much sleep do you need, and based on sleep consistency over time seems to be one of the most important factors. Based on this, we optimize the lighting toward basically this goal of making you sleepy at this point in time. Back to the eGym machines, or other machines such as the ARX, for example, or other prototypes. I recently heard Dave Asprey talk about his upgrade labs, in which he has 2 of the ARX machines. I think there are only 2 of these ARX machines. And the ARX machines, I think this stands for automatic resistance adaptation or something like this, but the X obviously doesn't stand for adaptation, so I don't know what it stands for. So this would be another example, and they also, I think they sell at 45k or something like this, but they would be available in theory at least for home gyms. Now, gym machines for gyms actually also sell often at ridiculous high prices. I recently searched for a treadmill, for example, from Precor, from basically used from a gym, and this sold for I think 3k euros on eBay. So in terms of affordability and taking these machines home, then maybe not so much, but maybe there is a kind of a AI machine. There are actually also a couple of other machines already. So one is called the OXFit, and there are two versions. One is for the home gym and one is for a commercial gym. There is also Tonal, I think, so there's a YouTube channel which takes a look at home gym equipment, garage gym reviews, I think it is, and so there are also a couple of reviews of kind of these smart implementations, or implementations of kind of a smart gym already, which then also would kind of allow this outsourcing of control. And since one cannot really be trusted, because system one kind of tries to always reduce the intensity of the workout, and then system 2 has to kind of override or try to override, but then the mental intensity is taken down because system 1 does not provide as much mental energy any longer, and so I cannot any longer demand so much energy because I'm just exhausted. And exhausted is kind of caused by because system 1 is exhausted, so it makes me kind of exhausted, and then I cannot demand as much mental intensity. And then if I'm on the sprint, if I'm on the treadmill, then I just cannot put out that much power and run not that fast. So, what if somebody now thought out the circuit? What if I could additionally do supersets? What if, now this is the ideal scenario, I show up at the gym. In addition, so recently I heard somebody, so I did a kind of a workout session at the gym where there were multiple people, kind of a HIIT workout session. And somebody who also was at the gym and also had a gym membership said like, yeah, but I need someone who hits me up at work and tells me that I should right now go to the gym. And now one could also think of a system that would, now maybe it's not an algorithm that tells you should go to the gym because you wouldn't really, so there would be maybe no social stakes. You could maybe give the algorithm rights to your bank account, and so every time you don't follow the orders of the algorithm, maybe 250 euros are deducted from your bank account if you don't show up at the gym. And things like these already, to a certain extent, can be automated. So my Gym's app, for example, not necessarily in terms of the bank account, but my Gym's app with the chip I have is able, whenever I check in, it basically has this data, and then it also gives me access to this data, so I can check my gym check-ins on this app, which I think is a very nice feature they have added in there. They're basically including so much of behavioral research and then giving this in this, and then also thinking about the UI and the UI of using this app, and then also whether this increases the adherence, but also thinking about the business. Do they actually want a higher compliance rate in terms of people showing up at the gym? Maybe also not. So that the fact that they are doing this seems to be also kind of an advantage for the average gym member, which then improves their health more than they otherwise would have, because the gyms might be betting on people just registering, thinking that they go to the gym, but actually not. So a nice feature in this case. So here, an ideal scenario. I, either by self-directed effort or with some help otherwise, or maybe it's also a friend that has a certain appointment with me, and this ideally then doesn't turn into a disappointment. And so but of course this is now dependent. What if the friend has something else and then he messaged me 2 minutes before, and then my dopamine goes down because I was looking forward to meeting this friend, and then we would be training together, and then I have to train alone, which I'm not used to, and so on and so forth. So as soon as one introduces a decision variable like this, then one could also have the downside of not having the decision variable activated, or if this is a positive thing, then one also has kind of to expect to have not this decision variable, or not have this additional variable, or positively contributing variable, and then have these sessions where one trains alone, but one did not expect, where one initially expected the other person to show up, and then it doesn't, he doesn't, she doesn't. Now, ideally I get myself to the gym, then I start my workout, I track this workout, so my watch is also connected to this. Instead of needing this, I could just log in with my watch at the gym, so I'm just like, bing, then I'm at the gym, and then maybe so, first of all, now what it could already be like. With the machines that are available, one could already have a circle, and also there is already a mode available where one could switch between the exercises. So one could imagine a program that is also basically including the superset option. I want to do supersets, so the program registers this and then tells me, okay, now go to this machine, and now go to this machine. And then, if multiple users want to access the same machine, and are kind of multiple algorithms of the users are trying to access the same machine, the machines, similarly to traffic rerouting with Google Maps, where Google Maps knows that this many people are on this route or planning to head there, that then it basically already sends these people another way in order to kind of avoid a traffic jam. Similarly, the algorithm in the gym could then tell basically the other algorithms, okay, we are planning to do this, but we already said this earlier, so there could be different rules implemented where the first come, first served, for example, and I don't know, maybe the one person has a plus membership that then overrides the memberships of all the other people, and then, well, one might imagine basically price differentiation also in the gym in terms of this. Now, And then I could just go through the workout, and maybe I would have also earbuds in, and it just tells me, okay, now go to this machine, now go to this machine, and now do this many reps. But this would also now be a very it would be a very UE inefficient option. UE inefficient option. One could also imagine now, I just have to sit down at the machine, and I am guided already by some other things to the right machine, or the last machine already tells me now go to this machine, and so on and so forth. Or the only thing I can do is log into the next machine, but then of course I could take a break for 30 minutes in between. Of course, now there would be multiple things which could be implemented in order to increase adherence in this case. Now, then I would move from machine to machine. On the individual machines, I just do whatever the machine says. In this case already, the eGym machines are adapted to me. So there is a thing called the eGym Hub, and I stand in front of it, and then it measures my body composition, I input my weight, and then it automatically basically adapts all of the different seats of the machines and the handles and moves them up and down, and then I can just start. I actually had a trainer adjust one of these machines, and there was also an iteration with the previous machines where the trainer had to adjust all of the machines individually. But then I noticed that because I now had this one machine just adjusted, I also felt that the data would have been polluted if this one machine is adjusted, and I actually also didn't feel it was right, and I also didn't want to buffer the trainer because the time is also valuable, and I didn't want to ask again. So I just reset basically the definitions of what the machines should go for, and by basically inputting again my weight and my body composition, and then I just overrode what the trainer had put in there, kind of on my own, which also would allow the gym in the long term to kind of automate more and more. Of course, one could say, okay, is this a good thing, is this a bad thing, that basically a gym kind of can run on its own. One could already imagine a gym like this, where the machines are totally automated, and you cannot do anything wrong because the machine has kind of fail-safes built in. If you cannot drop the weight onto your foot because there are no weights. You cannot move to this machine and then manipulate this machine in some way where you can tear your biceps, for example, because this movement is just not possible. You just move from machine to machine. And now, apart from myself, okay, I have been training for many years, and I also consider something like this. There are maybe also other people which would benefit much more from something like this, which would be maybe an 80-year-old or a 60-year-old, which now should do resistance training because otherwise he gets sarcopenia. And then one could imagine it is just a plug-in thing. Okay, the doctor says, okay, you need a gym subscription. The insurance then pays for the gym subscription. Then you show up at the gym, then you stand up in front of this eGym Hub, then you measure flexibility, you get an age marker for flexibility. Then you put in your VO2 max, you don't know your VO2 max, then you do a blood pressure measurement, which then has a resting heart rate. Ideally, you do this in the morning, but so they tell you to show up in the morning at the gym, so then you have a resting heart rate. And the resting heart rate can be used to calculate the VO2 max, so this can be used in some way or another. Whether the algorithm then already knows that this is just a calculation based on resting heart rate, I don't know. And then you would have the blood pressure input, and then this would make up the cardiovascular part of the age. So it would give you a cardiovascular age. And then you would step on this scale, which is also connected to the eGym Hub in this case. And I step on the scale once a week, and this gives me basically many different things, such as how much muscle mass my right arm has, how much fat there is in my torso, what is my visceral fat level in my case too. And so it then gives me also a body composition age, and then it also has a strength age, because on these eGym machines you can do 1 rep max tests, which then give out strength markers. You can also include other exercises as well, so other sets of, let's say, bench press, because there is not a bench press, there is only this chest press. And also in my gym there are only 6 exercises, 6 eGym machines. And then the person already kind of understands, because the age marker maybe is something that can be understood quite easily, instead of, okay, how many reps like this, and then I listen to 16 more episodes of the of the Andy Galpin Performance Podcast, even though it only has 3 episodes as of now. And then I listen to all the Huberman Lab episodes, but I'm already 65 and I can make it only through 2.5. And so maybe this is just a little bit too complicated. And then I listen to this guy online and this guy online, and then Paul Saladino says I should eat pineapples, but Andrew Huberman says I should avoid eating this, and so and then it becomes quite complicated. But what if I just showed up at the gym, and now the insurance might also pay for my sleep part? So what if then I sign up? Okay, so I get this recommendation by the doctor because I have sarcopenia, let's just say. And then also my meal shakes, which I already might have been subscribed to, or there is also a service that does not offer meal shakes but offers full nutritional meals, which are then basically coming in these boxes. And so I get basically this initial signal, this initial stimuli, not necessarily stimuli but signal. Okay, and then all these other things adapt to this new goal. And instead of having normal Huel, I now switch to Huel Black, because now the blood markers tell me maybe there have also been a few blood markers drawn, and so now I have too low levels in this and this and this, and I also genetically maybe have a lower testosterone level, so I might have maybe more protein in order to stimulate more muscle protein synthesis, muscle synthesis, or hypertrophy. And so all of these components, they could be more and more connected, and then I show up at the gym and it tells me, okay, you need to show up at the gym 3 times. And now it doesn't matter when you show up, just show up at this specific day. And even if you don't show up at this specific day, if you count in the next day, then we already calculated how much rest these different muscle groups had in between, and then we change the order of the exercise machines, and then you just log in and it tells you this machine, this machine, this machine, this machine, this machine, and then it says stop, or it doesn't tell you stop, but you just do 3 sets, and then it's like blink, 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 it's like red, and you cannot do any further set. And then you go to the next machine. So implementing this, it's just taking all of the components that kind of already are existing, such as meal shakes, kind of the early version of this. There are also already food services, but the problem is that they are often not scientifically based, or they are not basically connected to your blood markers, to your medical history. This might also be a kind of an issue of basically law and of data permissions and so on and so forth. And so connecting all of these different things seems to be kind of so not so obvious. And also, I haven't started a company yet which maybe does this, but also if I start a company, then it might go south anyway. So the third portion of this would be that, so basically recognizing that as long as there are forces, one could also say, as long as the long-term incentive vector I can possibly create for myself is always kind of deviating from the mid and short-term incentive vector that I could create, not the incentive vector that I could create, but also the incentive vector that I can create. So if I show up at the gym at a certain time and then I'm tired, then the incentive vector that I currently have, or the vector of behavior that results out of the current incentives rather, kind of drives me towards maybe not doing as many sets and so on and so forth. But what if it actually in the long term would be more optimal at this specific point in time to deviate from a routine? So in the last couple of years, I basically kept my routine fairly consistent. I only change a couple of percents usually, so I kind of have the same duration. But what if it actually would be more optimal if I could outsource this? But the reason I don't outsource this, but if I actually changed more of my exercise plan, because then I would hit different muscle groups, and then I would also learn new movements and so on and so forth. But I don't do this, mostly because the only way I can currently run this routine is by teaching my system 1 this routine again and again and again and again, and by only making very small changes in order to have it run as automated as possible, in order to me, system 2, only having to decide, okay, I need to go work out, but then also the workout decision is kind of more and more taken over by system 1. Is at certain times during the day, due to habit, I now need to work out, and then I start the process of going to the gym. And so one could imagine a future in which then there are also wireless updates, such as, okay, we now improved the resistance curve for all of these exercises, or only 3 out of the 19 e-gym machines that are in the gym. So similarly to how there could be a factory which makes the food powder, and then the factory auto-delivers the food powder at these specific times, completely automated. Of course, there need to be also machines that deliver the food powder, basically, and make the food powder, and so on and so forth. It needs to be connected. There probably are still humans involved, but nonetheless, one could imagine a system which in total kind of works as this kind of automated system. Similarly to how a company, for example, or if a founder steps back as the CEO from a company, then of course the company also to a certain extent should run on its own, and maybe does run on its own, because it's automated in a way that also includes humans in this case, but it's not requiring basically the personal choice of the CEO on a daily basis any longer, or the personal choices or decisions. So if one again takes these 3 main distinct buckets that improve health, or maybe factor into health, and then create a certain health score at every single day, then if one then wirelessly updates things like, okay, we now have the latest scientific studies are in, and now we know that instead of switching from this exercise to this exercise, it is actually more useful if we switch in this other exercise in between. Now, of course, we have these constraints. If there are other people at the gym, then we can only ever have like 2 of these machines set up, also because of the financial budgeting constraints of this gym in this location, and there's only this member density. But similar to the food algorithm, it's like, given all I know about you, this is now the best workout for you. And maybe in the future we don't need to work out at all any longer because there's a pill that does most of the things exercise currently does. But nonetheless, one could imagine I just show up at the gym and then I'm guided through the workout and I finish again at the gym. The same would be true for meal automation or nutritional automation. And of course, this is also optional. The meal service could be optional. There could be still people not having this. This is not something that needs to be established for everyone and force-fed to everyone in this case. And the sleep part could also be optional. There could people still be sleeping in caves. There could people still be sleeping in normal sleep pods. And probably there will be people, because probably many of these people worldwide cannot afford these things. Similarly to how, for example, many people these days could afford maybe a cooling mattress already, or maybe can't afford a cooling mattress already because 8Sleep, for example, costs like $3,000 plus a subscription fee anywhere from $10 to $30 a month. And so many people already cannot opt into this automation of sleep, which already is kind of occurring. This revolution, one could call this, or this marginal revolution of health, where some people at every single day just have better health scores due to basically factors they could potentially control and other people also could control, but just because they can already afford it and just because they have maybe genetically a little bit more computational power, which allows them to plug in all of these different components, and maybe also they generated already more money, which means they can kind of access something like 8Sleep. They can access something like, okay, Hue, but also individualize, because instead of having an algorithm that takes care of this, I already have like 2 nutritionists full-time working for me, making basically my meal shakes, or one nutritionist that basically takes a look at my health data every single day. The other one is the cook that basically gets all the different things. I might also have like 2 people basically babysitting my children, and so on and so forth. So it does not need to be a program. It just needs to be kind of a system. And in terms of the gym, if there are already people having trainers, so the whole idea is not that unusual. It's just that with the algorithm, one introduces basically a lower cost, not a lower cost, but the barrier to entry to kind of a smart system like this, which would over time compound in basically better health, might be lowered. And therefore, this would be also maybe to a certain extent a democratization of health that allows with so there is a genetic range, one could say. Some people just have a likelihood for, or some people just have a predisposition, or not necessarily a predisposition in this case, but just have a genetic potential, for example, or basically their genes make them kind of likely to have higher testosterone levels, which then make it more likely that they have increased muscle mass, which might then make them live longer, which might also mean that they have better grip strength, which then again might correlate to mortality, or negatively correlate with mortality, and positively correlate with life and health span. And so one could maybe at least level up. Now, of course, also people with good genetics, for example, could then level up to a higher level. So maybe it's not so much a democratization, but much more an optimization, basically bringing everybody up at least a little bit.